Today, I'm going to talk to you about how we at Ontario Middle School have leveraged a multi-tiered system of support for innovation to enhance learning for all of our students. Our target today is to gather relevant ideas about how one might consider structuring their multi-tiered. Sorry, we just welcomed kids back to school this last Wednesday, and so we're going to get a couple of bells. I apologize for that. But we're looking at how one might consider structuring their multi-tiered system of support at the middle school level in particular, in order to utilize a lens of equity for students who have historically been marginalized. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, but if you are interested, there is a parking lot available. It's going to be a collaborative document amongst all of us that are in this presentation. And feel free to write your questions if something comes up as we are discussing throughout this session. Feel free to fill in the answers if we've already answered one of the questions. And there's a section there for your email as well. In case there are some questions that we don't get an opportunity to answer, I can email you as soon as we're done. Hopefully later this afternoon or tomorrow, I'll be able to get back to all of the questions that we might not have had time to address. Okay, so Ms. Defonso introduced me. I'm Mrs. Smith. I work at Ontario Middle School in the Ontario School District. I'm serving as the Instructional Support Specialist at the middle school. I've also served as a grant director, a classroom teacher, reading specialist, university instructor, an item writer for the ILPA 21, an administrator, and then I'm always a reader, collaborator, and supporter of education and educators. When preparing this presentation, we polled our staff to ask them what it is about our school that makes us so effective. I didn't want to provide just my perspective, and so the word cloud that you see on the screen is what our staff said that makes us who we are. It's our secret sauce, if you will. So throughout this presentation, we'll share with you the what and a great deal of the how we do what we do here. What we cannot promise to do is provide a system that's going to work for every school. We're going to talk to you about the system that's worked for us and provide some insights into how we developed our systems, which will hopefully give you all some ideas about ways that you can take and modify the system in a manner that fits your school's needs. The steps that we follow are not unique to our district. We've developed a system with a strong research base, and we continue to problem solve and research and keep current on all of the research that is happening, especially during this pandemic time. A lot of new research on comprehensive distance learning has been coming out. And so we're constantly striving to find new and better ways to address our systems and continue to refine regularly. All right, so to begin, who is Ontario Middle School? This is a picture of our school. We're located in Eastern Oregon, just over the border from Idaho. In fact, many of our teachers actually live in Idaho. During our time together today, we're going to share a bit of information about our journey to improving student achievement and how we have leveraged a multi-tiered system of support in order to innovate instruction in a way that enhances learning for all of our students. This process is leading us to an increased academic proficiency on our Oregon State assessments and is improving access to the curriculum for all students. Our current student population, we have 100% free and reduced lunch at our school. 66% of our students are of Latino or Hispanic origin, and 28% of our students are ever English language learners. Ontario is home to 2 of the top poverty hotspots in the state of Oregon. And as of 2016, Malheur County is one of the top 10 poorest counties in our entire nation. However, even given these demographics, we find that our enrollment has gone up incrementally since we began leveraging our MTSS system in the way that we have. We're a grade 7 and 8 school, and we began with 333 students enrolled in 2017. We increased to 342 in 2018, and then 369 in 2019. Students from our local area are seeking out the Ontario School District because of the wonderful things that we have going on here, which is an important indicator of our successes. Enter the pandemic and the introduction of comprehensive distance learning, and the fact that we are on the Idaho border and Idaho has opened up schools in full capacity since August. It is also important to note that even given our CDL situation, we enrolled 357 students at the beginning of the school year and now currently have 361 students enrolled. Okay, so maybe your demographic challenges aren't the same as Ontario's, but how many of us have struggled with improving outcomes on the Smarter Balanced Assessment? How many of us have scores that may have been stuck in a rut? I know ours were. From the inception of the Smarter Balanced Assessment, we struggled to make gains in achievement in both ELA and math. When we looked even further back on our OAK scores and considered our students' longitudinal data, we noticed that not only were the SBA scores stagnant, but our OAK scores had been stagnant for quite some time as well. And to top it off, our students seemed to be losing ground on their individual scores when we completed an individual item analysis for each student. This was a problem for us. But how to address the issue was an area we didn't have a complete answer to in the system that we were using at the time. We didn't have extremely relevant data as the SBA was so new. It was hard to utilize assessments that had been designed for use with the OAKS assessment in the new SBA format. And so it was hard to use the data that we did have to make timely instructional changes. And our teachers didn't always know what that would look like if we did have the data. So what did we do about it? Well, we adopted a new diagnostic assessment tool that was designed to reflect the changes that came about with the Smarter Balanced Assessment. We adopted it for both reading and math, and it helped us determine where students were and plan instruction that was able to meet them where they were and launch them forward at what was lightning speed. In order for this implementation of the tool to be effective, we realized that our ORTIi system that we were utilizing needed a few improvements, and it made sense to shift towards a multi-tiered system of support that took into account not only the ORTIi components we'd been looking at, but also our safe and civil schools information, in addition to the wellness and mental health of our students. We really committed ourselves at that time to looking at education more holistically and with a focus on how adjustments in one of those areas would create changes in another area. So in the spring of 2017, we conducted a pilot of that diagnostic assessment, and we launched our official changes to the MTSS system. Using these supports and implementing MTSS more deeply in the fall of 2017 and 2018, here's what we've been able to do. Using these supports and creating a system that really uses relevant and timely data while building a school-wide culture of student achievement. You can see from 2014-15 in both ELA and math, our scores were pretty well the same. We'd go up a little or down a little here or there. Realizing that we're a grade 7 and 8 school, our population changes at least by half every year. So these scores are reflective of that information. Once we implemented the system in 2017-18, our ELA scores grew by 5%. That was the first time they'd done that in a very long time. And our math scores increased student proficiency by 12%. That was huge for us. In the 2018-19 school year, we increased our ELA student achievement by 6% and our math achievement by another 11%. And then of course the pandemic hit in 2019-20 and we didn't have SBA data to utilize. However, we did still have our diagnostic and in-program assessments that we utilized in our MTSS system. At the time that we closed due to the pandemic, we were on track to increase the percentage of students demonstrating proficiency in both reading and math. The expected proficiency that we had if we were able to give SBA last spring was an increase of 9%. We expected that our students would be able to reach 66% academic proficiency on the ELA SBAC. In math, we expected another 13% of growth. And our numbers had been pretty close to spot on in the years since 2017 in regards to our growth. So during our first full year with the tools, our ELA achievement increased by 5% and math by 12%. This doesn't even begin to discuss what happened to our individual student growth over those 2 years, or what our subgroup growth has looked like for the last few years. For the sake of time, we'll let you look further into that using school report card data, but trust us, it was nothing short of amazing to us. And for the 2018-19 school year, huge amounts of growth again. Needless to say, these gains, after years of remaining stagnant or sometimes decreasing a little bit in achievement, were very exciting to us and demonstrated to us that the changes that we'd made to our MTSS system were working in a positive manner. So how did we get there? What were the changes? How did we do it? Our MTSS team is one small team, but we have a very big focus. We utilize response to intervention and instruction ideology, as well as take into consideration our safe and civil schools procedures. At our elementary levels, they're using the PBIS structure, but middle school or secondary schools are using safe and civil schools, and also looking at student wellness and mental health. Team communication is key. Our smaller MTSS team maintains communication throughout the year with one another, but we also work very closely with our grade level and content area teams in order to gather input, receive feedback, and disseminate information. Not only do we share with these teams, but we also meet at the beginning of the year and after each trimester to share information and receive feedback from the whole staff, not just our teaching staff. We utilize and share this information with all of our school employees in order to make sure that we're all on the same page. All teachers are provided input opportunities prior to each MTSS meeting so they can share information about their students. Every teacher in our building has an advisory class, which is like a homeroom. That's where they build relationships with students, review student grades and data with them, and are able to focus on the needs of a smaller group of students. Teachers provide academic, behavior, and curriculum information on each one of their advisory students to the MTSS team prior to the MTSS team meeting. And they also have the opportunity to provide information on content area students that they don't have an advisory with whom they have concerns. So our schedule looks like this. Our MTSS team itself, the small team, includes our building administration. Both our principal and vice principal are members of that team. The instructional coach, so myself, our counselor, learning specialist, and ELD specialist are all included in those team meetings. Our EL specialist and our counselor, as well as our 504 coordinator and learning specialist, are vital in order to make decisions that are concerning our special populations, in order to make sure that we're disaggregating information adequately and arriving at the same conclusions. And we could not have as much success in our MTSS team without those individuals being a part of that. So what does that team do? We, as a small group, review data with specific input from all staff. We look at whole school data during a core review meeting, and we break that down into individual student data that is disaggregated not only by individual student, by our subgroup populations as well. We do this at least 4 times a year, prior to the beginning of the school year, and then after each of our trimesters. This year we've been doing the work virtually. However, prior to that, we met as a group face-to-face. And then we do this to gather our initial impressions of areas of success, as well as areas that we're concerned about, and to review concerns about individual students, and to celebrate those successes that we've had based on changes that we made as a team. Now, MTSS doesn't stop with our small actual MTSS team. It also is shared school-wide, and not only shared, but we utilize this information collaboratively. So we meet as an MTSS team and with all certified staff, and in some cases, like I mentioned before, all building staff, depending on the need. The whole group reviews the data with input from everyone and based on the decision-making of the MTSS team. So the MTSS team puts together a series of suggestions, and then we take it to the whole staff to determine how we can facilitate those suggestions most effectively. And we do that building wide. Not only do our ELA and our math teachers focus on their content areas, but every teacher in the building is focused on student success and achievement. And we're looking at data from every subject area, not only ELA and math, which are our tested subject areas, and then of course science at the 8th grade level, but we're looking at all of our classes. Again, these are conducted at least 3 times a year. We typically don't meet at the beginning of the year as a whole staff until we have our second data point. So then we'll meet after each trimester in order to have those whole staff MTSS discussions. And so why do we do that? We do that to review decisions that are impacting everyone and identify areas of success and concern, as well as to find solutions to those areas of need that the MTSS team found. So we talked at first about our core review process. This process is what we use to look at the health of all of our courses to determine if they're meeting the needs of our students. This is what we do before we break down and disaggregate into individual student data. We look not only at whole school trends, but we break apart our subgroups in this process. I'm gonna go ahead and share with you a screen. Just a second. Okay, with an image of our school-wide core review agenda. This is what drives those discussions. We use the same agenda at every level in the district. And it really helps us be able to hone in on the health of our overall core. Okay, so you'll see that we adapted our tool from one created by Kimberly Strong, who's the regional capacity builder for the High Desert ESD. And we use this to look at things specifically this year. This one is targeted a little bit more specifically to our CDL environment that we began in August. And so we look at not only our typical attendance, behavior, and curriculum, but we're also looking at engagement. So how well our students are engaged with their teachers. And is that communication two-way or is it only one way? Which has made a difference in being able to target those students who need extra support in the engagement area. We also look at behavior, course performance. We disaggregate our iReady reading and our iReady math data in addition to looking at in-program assessments for both ELA and math. And then we are looking also at those barriers that could be caused during the CDL, health, safety, access, lack of capacity, lack of connection, and then myths or miscommunications to make sure that we're really evaluating where our students are. As you go through the problem-solving process, there's a step in our system where we develop our plan and determine what needs are most pressing. We try to ensure that we're not focusing on several needs at one time, but that we're really doing a good job honing in on the most pressing needs before we move our focus. In order to really make a difference, we need to hone in like a laser on those most pressing problems. Okay, so what has come about as a result of that process? Well, we've created a master schedule that works for us. This, of course, is the master schedule from the last school year when we were in face-to-face instruction. It looks differently this year with our CDL and then our limited in-person instruction, and then now moving into our hybrid schedule. But in a typical school year, we focus on trying to make sure that our schedule is as flexible as possible for students. When people see our scores, one of the first things they ask is about the master schedule. How do we make sure students have time in their day for interventions at the secondary level? Well, we have the same master schedule that we had prior to the SBAC increases with a few minor tweaks. We've created a team that now includes enough teachers to offer the intervention classes. We offer enough sections that every student who needs it can get intervention support. And we plan the schedule, our counselor plans the schedule with enough flexibility that our students aren't in an intervention all year if they don't need the intervention all year. So they move flexibly at the trimesters in and out of those intervention classes based on their individual needs. Typically, our class sizes at the beginning of the year are around 18 to 20 in those interventions, and that number tends to decrease as the school year goes on and they're receiving effective interventions that are making changes for them. As our student scheduling needs change, we open up more elective classes as the year progresses so that we can move them from intervention classes into additional electives as they're needed. However, if we move them into an elective and they start to demonstrate additional need, they weren't quite ready to have that support dropped yet, we're able to move them flexibly, back into those intervention classes should that be what they need at the time. Most of our students are moving in and out at the trimester. Our highest movement out of intervention classes happens right after the second trimester. We also prioritize an advisory period for all of our students and all of our teachers that has an academic focus that helps to get everyone, both students and teachers of every subject area, on board with the instructional needs of all of our students. So having a middle level master schedule that meets student needs requires having quality electives that students want to take. This is one of the major incentives that we have for students, not only to do their best on their diagnostic, but to perform consistently well in their intervention classes. There's a hope that they can get out and take other classes that they're interested in, and that's a big motivator for middle-aged students. Then we take the diagnostic again at the end of the year. So we take it at the beginning of the year to gauge our summer loss. We take it near the end of each trimester to make sure that we are able to effectively move students in and out of classes. And we take it again at the end of the year to help us plan for master scheduling the next year. We also give our diagnostic assessment to our 6th grade students who are coming into our middle school the next year to help us gauge how many seats we need in each of our classes. We follow up with every student after their diagnostic. We ask them questions like, does this score represent what you know? We share with them their grade level equivalent on the assessment. And if they say that they didn't do their best on the test, we do open that diagnostic up again and let them have the control of their schedule by being able to take that assessment again. If they really didn't do their best job, a lot of times the motivation that they need is just knowing that they're being given that opportunity to prove what they know. We encourage our students to use the iReady program in the summer and during summer school as a means of filling in gaps that they might have from missed days of education in their earlier years. And then we, of course, build our master schedule so we have that movement. Taking that diagnostic at the beginning of the year also helps us to reset their lessons to make sure that they're getting online lessons that they need. They're able to do those at school or at home, and it helps us to determine their baseline starting point for growth for the year. So I know that I've thrown a lot of information at you so far. Remember that we do have that collaborative parking lot available for questions, and we will be looking through those at the end of our session. All right, so course scheduling for individual students. We master schedule in a way, again, that builds time for students to have their schedules changed. We keep that flexibility in there and always reserve a few open spaces for students who are new to the district. One of the things that students do when they come in for an orientation with us is they take that diagnostic assessment so that we have a way to gauge their academic needs from the moment they walk into our doors. We tend to make changes to about 1/3 of our population on each diagnostic, so moving in or out of intervention classes. And then we make additional changes due to class size limitations and scheduling needs. If students have classes that are scheduled during the intervention times, we work with them to make sure that they're getting those classes that they need. One of the things that we also have worked on that we've realized through our core review process is the need for pacing that works for students. We make sure that every teacher in the building makes it through their curriculum in a given year's time span. Now, with the current pandemic situation, that's changed a little bit. We're still working to get through as much of the curriculum as we can. However, realizing that there are some needs for our students that may not have been there before. So the timeline is something that teachers look at early in the school year to make sure that they plan appropriately in order to get through the curriculum and do it well during the given year. Especially in the area of math, we find that students who have missed a chapter or didn't quite get all the way through the curriculum have a harder time filling in those gaps than if we continually spiral review through those concepts that were most difficult for them and keep our pacing moving forward. So our goal setting and incentives is another key to our MTSS system. Our students do best when they understand what's expected of them and they have a say in that expectation. So our advisory classes are important as they work with students individually to set their goals for iReady growth as well as SBAC growth. We tend to not set proficiency goals. We really focus on individual student growth goals, and they work with their teachers to determine what that growth should look like. We have a standard that utilizes a formula based on our previous year's data of what our students have been able to do with our teachers as kind of a baseline for our advisory teachers to go off of, but they then work with the individual student and their families to set the goal that's most appropriate for them. We do this by community and team building. It produces security and familiarity with the advisory teacher and gives parents a single point of contact for questions about those growth goals, which really helps divide the workload, not only for our teachers, but gives our parents a place to feel comfortable, a teacher that they can ask questions to readily and easily, and makes it easier for our teachers who have 170, 180 students a day in their content area classes to really be able to hone in and focus on those individual student needs of the 18 to 20 in their advisory group. Now, we do various incentives throughout the year. We have challenges based on iReady lessons. We have challenges for growth. We provide several opportunities for immediate feedback as far as growth and proficiency on content standards goes. We set long-term goals for students, looking not only at their growth over the school year, but also from the minute they walk into our building, talking to them about their growth during the entire time they're at the middle school and what that can look like in their trajectory to the high school. We schedule big rewards early. So we're looking at if students meet or exceed their growth goals, there are big incentives that occur at the end of the year after those results are in that we've scheduled early on so students know what that incentive is and they get a say in that. We send out student surveys quite regularly to really see what students want, what they need, and what they're excited about. That's a huge factor in how we schedule incentives. It's got to be something that students want and are looking forward to. And then we check in with advisory teachers regularly. Students check in with advisory teachers on their growth and their academic performance every single week. It really is a mentor period for us. So when we set our goals, we talk to our students about goals should scare you just a little bit. You should be a little bit worried that you might not reach it But it should excite you a lot, because when you do reach that goal, it's a big deal. And we make sure that students are able to set goals that are realistic, but maybe a little bit scary, but also extremely exciting. We also do our testing a little bit differently since we really honed our MTSS systems. Several years ago, we would take all of our assessments over several days. So if we were taking an ELA assessment, it would take several days of our ELA periods to get through it. What we do now is we have testing days, and we build a schedule that includes breaks, but provides time for students to sit uninterrupted for lengthier amounts of time so they can really get into the test. We found that breaking their attention in the middle of a testing block was really difficult for them to get back into the testing mode when they came in the next day. Given that we were providing assessments during the periods, of course, a 40 or 45-minute class period, by the time you get in, take your attendance, get settled in, review expectations, you wind up with only 15 to 20 minutes of continuous think time, because then again, you have to be prepared to leave and be at your next class on time. So creating testing days made a big difference for us, and ensuring that our break times were adequate but not too lengthy was tremendously helpful. We also surveyed students after this change, and students dramatically preferred testing in a single day or within 2 days, as opposed to testing over several different days, several different weeks. So we use for our iReady diagnostic assessments a single day to assess their reading and a single day to assess their math. And then at the end of the day, we provide what we call a social, so a fun activity at the end of the day to break up the length of the testing day, really taking into account their mental health and how taxing the testing day can be. So in order to facilitate all of this, of course, teachers have a lot on their plate to manage. So how we help organize that information for teachers is we've created a superhero document that includes all of our schedules, all of our expectations, all of the scripts that they use before and after testing and during testing, so that they get that practice throughout the year with our expectations for what those diagnostic assessments look like, to ensure that our students are able to have the same testing experience across the board. We have expectations that our students annotate, and they set up and gather their materials on their way into the room so that they are prepared, just like we would ask them to if they were taking an SAT or an ACT or any sort of a college assessment. We really try to set our students up for success by creating a testing environment that is consistent. It helps to reduce anxiety, and our students test in the same room every time, again, to help reduce anxiety around testing. We work hard to set them up for success. Along with that, another thing that has come about because of our core review meetings was a continued focus on consistency. All of our teachers utilize consistent planning for every class. And we're planning not only for what we're doing during class, but we're planning for the student interactions that happen during classes. This came about largely because of the gaps that we saw in our SPED and EL populations in those early years. And in order to refine and build that and ensure that every student was provided access to that effective peer interaction during class time, we created an intentional planning document. This is a district-wide document that we utilize for common lesson planning across the district. Our students become familiar with it early on, and they understand the format of our lessons. Consistency helps reduce anxiety and ensures that students know what they're looking for. It's just like using learning targets at the beginning of a lesson. We focus on ELP standards, those English language proficiency standards, across our day in every subject area, and we're really focused on getting kids to get language in the air. This focus has not changed during our CDL time. Our teachers are working creatively to make sure that our students are able to communicate and interact with one another. They're using collaborative documents. They're using tools like Flipgrid and Seesaw to get students interacting and talking with one another, which has been extremely important in maintaining consistency through our comprehensive distance learning this school year. So after our core review process, where we look at our overall systems and disaggregate based on subgroups, we move our MTSS team into what we call intervention review. Intervention review is how we plan our individualized student schedule changes. We review goals throughout every term. They're looking at that in advisories, and we provide lab classes. I haven't mentioned that yet, but our lab classes are those intervention periods that we were talking about, that students move flexibly in and out throughout the school year. Our lab classes are not an additional homework time. They are targeted, focused, individualized interventions at the tier 2 level for our students who have demonstrated academic need. Our students take the diagnostic at least a week before the term ends, which gives our MTSS time to meet and plan for schedule changes based on their data and individualized student growth. And then every advisory teacher follows up with every advisory student regarding their effort and the score on the diagnostic. They get to take retakes if they feel like that's appropriate, but that gets to be the student's choice. We really encourage student choice and voice in their education and helping them to create ownership. And then we move students based on their test scores. One of the biggest things that makes this work for us is the use of our school counselor, who meets with students who may disagree with a change or think that they're not ready, and discusses that with them. She has tremendous amounts of buy-in to our system and is helpful in being able to, accommodate students as they move at about a rate of 1/3 of our students every term. Having our counselor be able to have those one-on-one conversations with students who might be apprehensive about a schedule change has been tremendously helpful. And it also helps our MTSS team have that perspective and mental health consideration when we're planning for these changes, so that we're not only looking at the academic needs of our students, but also considering the student more holistically. So communication and collaboration amongst students and staff, and amongst the MTSS team, administration, and our staff as well, is vital. Not only do we leave it at our teams and our student and teacher interactions, but we ensure that we collaborate with the entire certified staff before any final decision-making happens. We gather more information and ensure that the decisions that we're planning to make really are in the best interest of students and staff alike. We communicate and collaborate with our entire staff when it's appropriate on decisions that are going to impact everyone. And then we make sure to maintain regular communication. We typically do this through our advisory teachers regarding school-wide systems, and especially individual student successes and concerns, needs, and goals. Ensuring that the families are kept in the loop throughout the process is vital in making sure that our systems are effective and working for all students. We also collaborate individually with students regarding the school-wide systems, as well as their own successes. We make sure to celebrate every student's success with them at an individual level. We also discuss their current needs and their goals, both short-term and long-term. And then we collaborate district-wide regarding school-wide systems, as well as areas pertinent to the health of the district systems. And that has been tremendously helpful for us across the board, ensuring that we are open and transparent and making sure that we're making those connections so that everyone who's involved in our district and our school systems is aware of how they work and has input. To do all of this, our leaders have worked at capacity building. The strength of our leaders helps to ensure the strength of our team, and we've really appreciated that we have amazing leaders. Our leaders focus on students and staff when they're taking into account any changes that are going to be made. We are always allowed to utilize our strengths and build on each other's strengths. Collaboration is a huge focus at our building. They've ensured that there is respect for the process, which comes through creating a clear understanding of what that process is. And they trust that their staff is going to get the job done and to do it well. They're transparent and allow for great amounts of courage and integrity by giving their staff the opportunity to do what they hired them to do. They allow staff to collaborate and build on one another's ideas through the MTSS system and utilizing a clear set of guidelines that creates high levels of support amongst the staff for one another. Like I said before, our ELA teachers don't only focus on ELA. Our math teachers don't only focus on math. Our science teachers don't only focus on science. It really is an entire building effort in this system. They demonstrate gratitude when things are going well, and they give credit where credit is due, and demonstrate learning agility themselves, but also give us an opportunity as a staff to learn and grow from one another in ways that really help to build that capacity. Our MTSS system, our grade level teams, our content area teams are typically teacher-led programs that are really collaboratively developed across the teams, which helps to create not only teacher buy-in, but a very positive atmosphere. So I've talked a lot. We're going to provide some time prior to moving into what you're going to take back with you to look at questions. So I'm going to go ahead and step back. And if Sarah and Shelby, if you'd like to direct some questions, I am happy to begin answering those.
Amanda, I think one that's really pertinent right now, a question that just came up about that leadership idea, is who and what are those positions? Who are those leaders that you're referring to?
Great question. So our building administrators have allowed myself as the instructional coach and to really head up the MTSS team, schedule those meetings and things. But our team as a whole really works collaboratively. I take the lead typically on the scheduling pieces and managing and facilitating the use of the core review agenda and making sure that we're moving through that in a timely process, like the timekeeper. However, all members of that MTSS team work collaboratively to lead us through those pieces. Our counselor really makes sure that we're looping back into the mental health ideas and ensuring that we're keeping that as a focus. Our 504 coordinator and IEP learning specialist really keep us honed in on that. And our ELD specialist also keeps us aware of that subgroup data. So we're constantly leading those together. Our grade level and content area teams each pick a facilitator for each of their meetings and really run through those pretty independently as well. We check in with those regularly. As an instructional coach, I check in with each of those teams regularly, and it just depends on who's taking the lead. Our teachers are really encouraged to all step up and take leadership in ways that they feel most comfortable doing so.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Smith. There was a question in the chat from Haley Hinkle, where she commented on just how wonderful of a model you have described, and I appreciate your description of that. Her question came in the, her question was, what is the role of the school psychologist in this process you have developed? And Haley, just to let you know, from a district standpoint, we do not have a school psychologist that works within our school district. We have learning specialists within our district who are all certified special education teachers who conduct the majority of our testing when students are referred for a special education evaluation. We utilize ORTIi for SLD identification, so we do very few IQ tests throughout the course of the year. When we do need to do IQ testing, we subcontract with an outside psychologist to have those done.
Thank you, Shelby.
A few other questions. A great question from Erin Shepard is, Mrs. Smith, how long do your core review, your MTSS meetings last?
We have, in the past 2 years, we've been able to shrink the amount of time that they take. Our core review meeting typically takes a half of a day. And then we're working through our intervention review in another half of the day. So we're taking a full day to get through the core review and intervention review process. That's not to say that there aren't times when other duties get assigned to individual members of the team that might take a little bit longer and we have to reconvene for some of those, but we're typically getting through both processes in a day. Again, remember, we're a grade 7 and 8 school and we serve about 360 to 370 students and have really streamlined our process. When we first shifted how we were working through these, they were taking at least 2 days and sometimes 3 to get through both of those meetings.
There's another question in the chat, and I think this is a good one, probably not the only person that has this question. When you find yourself in a situation where there might be a lack of buy-in or a perceived lack of leadership, what are your suggestions for how to get this work really started when you're starting at square one, is what I'm taking from the question in the chat.
You know, to begin, really just focusing on the data and what is the data telling us, and keeping that intense focus on that information. It's difficult sometimes because as teachers, we get very attached to what those numbers mean for us in particular, but really bringing that focus back around on what does that mean for these students. And the data might not always be what we want it to be, which can sometimes make those discussions more difficult, especially when you see where we were starting several years ago. Those numbers and the fact that they hadn't moved for a long time were really hard. And it's something that as teachers we take very personally, but really just remembering that the focus needs to be on the students and how we're going to be able to take whatever that information is telling us and make a step in a positive direction. So again, just really focusing in on that data and what does it show that we need to work on? What's a positive step we can take, and keeping it simple, one step at a time. Don't try to fix all the problems at once because it's going to be overwhelming and impossible. What's the most pressing problem and how can we address that?
Mrs. Smith, a question that's been asked a couple different times to me privately is who teaches your lab classes for you? Great
question. We have in our building 2 teachers who teach 7th grade math, 2 who teach 8th grade math, and then the same with our ELA. Plus we have an individual who's able to teach either math or ELA, which is a huge benefit for us. And so we have tried it a few different ways. We have had our core ELA teachers, those that teach our grade level math and ELA, teach only the grade level classes with their partner teacher teaching the lab classes. We've had some years where we've decided to split and have our teachers teach half of grade level content and half lab classes. And the model that we have been using most regularly is having teachers dedicated to either core or the lab classes, and then they just work very closely together to determine what the best steps are to make sure that the lab teachers are able to provide that grade level stepping stone while also addressing that individual student need, which may be several grade levels below what their core class is teaching. So to answer that question, most recently, we have a single teacher teach all of the grade level classes, and all of our students take the grade level core classes. And then a second ELA or math teacher that's teaching the lab classes and collaborating regularly with a shared prep period to be able to make those lab classes the most effective.
So then another question that has come up a few different times is what curriculum do you use during those lab times? And somebody asked a question, let me see if I can find it. The labs are intended for tier 2 learning needs. How are tier 3 learning needs addressed?
Okay, so let me go to the first one. The curriculum that we use in the lab class is our grade level core curriculum, in addition to our iReady. So in our lab classes, we have the iReady diagnostic, but we also have the online learning portion of that. So our students in lab classes get 2 days a week of the iReady personalized online instruction, and the other 3 days a week, they're getting instruction that is from that core class materials, and it's being brought into the lab class with scaffolding and supports that the teachers are creating to help them get to bridge that gap between their instructional level and their current grade level. So we have very skilled teachers who've been working diligently together to find the most appropriate scaffolds to create that bridge between what the student's getting in iReady and what they're getting in that core period to help bridge that. As far as what our tier 3 learners are getting, they're getting that lab class, and then we're working within that lab class to provide additional interventions and supports when we notice that they're not making growth. We use the iReady growth monitoring tool, as well as our ELA teachers have another couple of assessments that they do when students aren't making progress on those growth monitorings. Our math teachers have a couple that we've created in-house as well to help gauge when they're not making progress. And then they are working with myself to individualize intensified instructions within those lab periods, just because we don't have additional time during the day to be able to put them into additional ELA or math classes.
Hey, Mrs. Smith, do you want to address what your learning specialists, what they teach? And then also a question was asked, do you see students who are identified with special needs also in those intervention classes?
Great question. Sorry. Kids are back. It's exciting, but the bells are sometimes annoying. So our learning specialists teach many of our most significant tier 3 students in classes based on their IEP needs. So we do have some classes that are specifically tier 3 once students have IEPs that meet that. They our initial tier 3 interventions to determine, if special education is a placement by the middle school level. Most of the times our students have been identified, but when we're identifying students, we do begin to increase those interventions in intensity within the lab classes. Once they're identified, sometimes the most appropriate placement is in the learning center, where they get additional lab classes that are specific to their needs. The question also was asked about, do our tier 3 students take those lab classes that are typically offered to our tier 2 general ed students? And really the answer is it's based on individualized student needs. So if we have students with special needs who are making positive growth in those tier 2 designed lab courses, then they take those rather than the tier 3 designed specialized courses taught by our learning specialists. We really try to ensure placement in the most appropriate setting in the least restrictive environment at all times. And so if they're able to demonstrate that academic growth that they at a rate that they should be, then they are taking those classes in those tier 2 lab classes. And if they're just not progressing and they have IEPs specific to either the math or ELA labs that are being offered in our learning center, then they are put into those courses. Those are team-based decisions that are not made only as the MTSS team. We make suggestions, and then our learning specialists bring together additional teams to ensure that we're following those processes. Those typically go through problem-solving processes again to determine the placement needs.
There is a question about wondering what reading curriculum do you use? I'm assuming this question is about your core curriculum, and more specifically, what intervention pieces might be available within your core to help prevent that curricular chaos that we know so often plagues some of our neediest students.
We actually just switched ELA curriculums last year, and so I'm probably going to totally butcher the name. We switched and then had the pandemic happen, and so some things have been different. I don't know that our teachers have had the opportunity to dive too deeply into the intervention curriculum associated with that And I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure what all materials are available there right at this minute, because we've been doing so much and relying so heavily on iReady just because of the computerized components throughout this school year. But our teachers have adopted a Houghton Mifflin curriculum, and I'm going to completely not remember the name right this second, and I apologize for that.
Is it, Mrs. Smith, is it collections?
It is, yes. Sorry, the pandemic hit right after the adoption period, and I could tell you every curriculum we tried. Yeah, it's the collections curriculum. You're correct, Shelby, thank you.
Mrs. Smith, we just have about 4 minutes left until the end of this session. There was a question related to our English language learners. Do you want to address how Ontario Middle School addresses and supports students who are English language learners?
Yes, I would absolutely be happy to. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and jump back. The pictures aren't always the best, but we have spent a lot of work over the last 4 years creating materials that are based heavily in the research of Aida Walke. We've worked with Ed Northwest and created some intentional planning documents that I mentioned earlier, but those are all focused on student interaction and the ELP standards and how we can leverage our planning and intentionality to ensure that all of our students are able to get the access to the curriculum that they need. Our teachers are strategically planning for visuals that are needed to support our EL students, and in their lesson planning, our teachers at the middle school level use a lot of slide presentations. And that is how we have asked them to specifically identify the intentionality in how they're addressing each of the components. So before our teachers assign tasks, they complete a task analysis process where they're really looking at the demands, the cognitive and linguistic demands of the tasks that they're assigning. And they identify 3 moments within their lessons and connect each of those moments to the ELP standards that they're going to be addressing within that lesson. They're focused on the modality of interaction throughout the lesson and are focused on clearly ensuring that all students have an opportunity to speak and discuss. They provide within their lesson plans the sentence frames or other linguistic supports and scaffolds and links to those within those slideshows for their students. It's been a huge benefit to be able to utilize Google Classroom this year. And all of our teachers have used that platform not only in our CDL environment, but also with our in-person students and our limited in-person students, in order to differentiate. Our students are getting those additional scaffolds now sent directly to them through their Google Classrooms and aren't having to search for those items. They get additional videos. Their readings are sometimes reworked depending on their language level. Each teacher is provided individual student learning levels, and I work closely with them to determine the most appropriate scaffolds. We reevaluate those throughout the year and help to remove some of those scaffolds and supports as students are improving in their language ability. We do some of the same things for our special education students as well, but really focusing in on those language demands and that task analysis process before we're giving anything to those language learners.
All right, Mrs. Smith, thank you so very much for your presentation and for sharing all the hard work that you've been doing at Ontario Middle School. I appreciate it, and I really appreciate it because my son went through Ontario Middle School last year, and my daughter is currently there with Mrs. Smith right now. So I am very appreciative of the hard work that the middle school staff puts in every single day to support all of our students. So thank you so much. Just in closing, I'm going to put a link in the chat for evaluation for this session. So I would encourage you to please go in and look at that. And then also we will have a shared Google Drive that has a copy of Mrs. Smith's presentation materials in there. Mrs. Smith, I've also said that we would add a few additional components into that shared Google Drive, both the core review agenda, as well as the 712 comprehensive assessment plan. So you and I can work together on that. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. We appreciate the hard work each and every one of you is doing to support students, not only within the state of Oregon, but across the United States and internationally as well. So thank you. Mrs. Smith, is there anything last you would like to say last?
There's just a lot of questions that came up right at the very end here about are our classes leveled. We do not level any of our core classes. All of those classes are not leveled. Our lab classes, of course, are leveled because they target those individualized student needs. So we are leveling the lab classes, but those are in addition to the core classes that they're getting, which are not leveled classes. Same goes for ELA. Otherwise, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I will be looking through the parking lot. If you have questions that you want answered, please leave your email and I am happy to send those to you.